I want to talk about something today that is almost never discussed in a doctor's office, almost never covered in diabetes educational materials, and almost never acknowledged in the conversations most people with diabetes have with the people around them. It is not a medication. It is not a protocol. It is not a new food to add to your diet. It is the exhaustion, not physical tiredness, not the fatigue that comes from a bad night of sleep or a long day on your feet, a different kind of exhaustion entirely. The kind that comes from never, not for a single day, not for a single hour, being able to fully set down the weight of managing a chronic condition. Think about what a normal morning looks like when you have type 2 diabetes. Before you have had your first cup of coffee, before you have spoken a word to anyone, you have already made decisions. You have checked your glucose. You have looked at the number and had a feeling about it, relief or dread or that familiar frustration. You have started calculating what you can eat for breakfast, what you cannot, what the impact of your choices will be 2 hours from now. You have thought about your medications, timing, whether you took them last night, whether you need a refill. You have maybe wondered whether that ankle swelling is something or nothing, whether that tingling sensation means anything, and it is not yet 7 in the morning. This is the reality of living with type 2 diabetes that very few people outside of it truly understand. It is not just a medical condition, it is a second job, a full-time job, running in parallel with everything else in your life, your actual work, your relationships, your family, your sleep, with no vacation days, no sick leave, and no retirement date on the horizon. Hello, you are on the Dr. Adam Watanabe channel. Today, I want to name what you may have been carrying for months or years without a word for it. And I want to talk about what to actually do about it. Not stay positive, not keep pushing through, but concrete evidence-based tools from chronic illness psychology that make this weight genuinely lighter to carry. The term for what many people with diabetes experience is diabetes burnout. And it is worth being precise about what that term actually means, because it is often used casually in ways that dilute its significance. Diabetes burnout is not occasional frustration with your condition. It is not having a bad week or a stretch of poor numbers. It is a prolonged state of emotional and psychological exhaustion specifically caused by the sustained effort of managing a chronic condition, a state in which the demands of self-management begin to feel overwhelming, pointless, or both simultaneously. Research published in the journal Diabetes Care found that approximately 40% of people with diabetes experience clinically significant burnout at any given time. Some studies put the number higher, and a longitudinal study following people with type 2 diabetes over 5 years found that periods of burnout were the single strongest predictor of deteriorating blood sugar control, stronger than dietary changes, stronger than medication adherence, stronger than physical activity levels. Let me say that again clearly. Burnout predicted worsening blood sugar control more powerfully than what people were eating. The psychological state was more predictive than the dietary behavior. This is not a soft finding about feelings. It is a hard finding about outcomes. Burnout is a clinical variable that affects blood sugar, and it is almost never assessed, acknowledged, or addressed in the standard care model for type 2 diabetes. Why? Because medicine is very good at treating measurable biochemical events. It is not designed at a structural level to sit with patients and ask how they are doing psychologically with the weight of managing a lifelong condition. The appointment is 15 minutes, the lab results need to be reviewed, the prescription needs to be renewed, the burnout in the room goes unaddressed, and the patient goes home carrying it alone. To understand why diabetes burnout is so common and so severe, you need to understand what makes diabetes psychologically different from many other health conditions. Most acute health problems have a narrative arc. You get sick, you receive treatment, you recover. The story has a beginning, a middle, and an end. There is a finish line. There is a point at which you are done, you are better, and you can stop thinking about it. Diabetes does not have that narrative. It is not an event. It is a condition that is present every day, demanding attention every day, with no resolution point on the horizon. There is no finish line. There is no moment of being done. There is only an indefinite continuation of daily management and the acceptance somewhere along the way that this is simply how life is now. Psychologists who specialize in chronic illness describe this as the loss of the healthy self, the version of you who did not have to think about this, who could eat without calculating, who could wake up without a blood sugar check shaping the first thought of the morning. Grieving that version of yourself is a real and legitimate psychological process, but it rarely gets acknowledged as grief. It gets dismissed as adjustment or overlooked entirely in the rush to manage the medical components of the condition. On top of that, diabetes carries what researchers call a high behavioral demand. Unlike a condition that is managed primarily by taking a medication once a day, diabetes management involves dozens of daily decisions: what to eat, when to eat, how much to eat, when to exercise, how intensely, how to handle a stressful day, whether a particular symptom warrants attention. Each of those decisions carries a consequence. Get it wrong and you feel it, in your glucose numbers, in your energy, sometimes in your body. That is not just a medical burden. That is a cognitive and emotional burden that compounds over years into something that can genuinely break a person's capacity to keep trying. Now the biology. Because burnout does not just feel bad, it measurably worsens the condition it is a response to. When you are in a state of chronic psychological stress and exhaustion, your body produces elevated levels of the stress hormone cortisol. We covered the cortisol-glucose connection in an earlier video, but here it is in the specific context of burnout. Elevated cortisol signals the liver to produce and release glucose. It reduces the sensitivity of cells to insulin. It promotes the accumulation of visceral fat, the kind that specifically worsens insulin resistance. It disrupts sleep, which independently raises fasting blood glucose the following morning. And it suppresses the parts of the brain responsible for motivation, planning, and behavioral follow-through, the exact capacities you need to manage diabetes well. So the cycle looks like this. The demands of diabetes management cause burnout. Burnout elevates cortisol. Cortisol raises blood sugar and worsens insulin resistance. Worse blood sugar control creates more demands, more checking, more adjusting, more decisions. More demands deepen the burnout, which elevates the cortisol more. This is not a vicious cycle that willpower can simply interrupt. Because the burnout is reducing the neurological capacity for willpower, at the same time it is demanding more of it. Telling someone in diabetes burnout to just be more consistent is like telling someone with a broken leg to walk it off. The advice is not wrong in isolation. It is simply impossible given the current state of the system. Understanding this cycle is not about excusing poor self-management. It is about understanding what actually needs to be addressed for self-management to become sustainable again. The first tool, shrink the decision load. One of the primary drivers of burnout in chronic illness management is what psychologists call decision fatigue, the progressive deterioration in the quality of decisions made after a long session of decision-making. The human brain has a finite capacity for decisions in a given day. When a large portion of that capacity is consumed by diabetes management before noon, everything else in the day, relationships, work, personal well-being, gets the depleted remainder. The solution is not to make fewer decisions about your diabetes. It is to reduce the mental effort of each individual decision through systematization. Practically, create a small set of default meals for breakfast and lunch, meals you know you trust and whose glucose impact you have already mapped, not meals you love, meals you trust. When you are tired, you eat a default. When you have energy and interest, you can vary. Removing the calculation from 2 meals a day reduces the daily decision burden by hundreds of small cognitive events. Do the same with your medication timing. Attach it to an existing habit, coffee, brushing teeth, the first news of the morning, so the decision to take it becomes automatic rather than deliberate. A deliberate decision requires mental energy. An automatic habit does not. A study published in the journal Health Psychology found that people with type 2 diabetes who used implementation intentions, specific if-then plans that automate decisions, showed significantly better medication adherence and lower self-reported burnout scores over 6 months compared to people relying on motivation and willpower alone. You do not need more motivation. You need fewer decisions. The second tool, reframe what a bad number means. Much of the emotional weight of diabetes management comes from the relationship most people develop with their glucose readings. A high number after a meal feels like a failure. A bad fasting number in the morning feels like a verdict on the previous day's effort. Over time, the glucose meter becomes not just a measuring device, but a judge, and checking it becomes a moment of anxiety rather than information. This reframe is supported by significant research in chronic illness psychology. The framing that produces the best long-term outcomes is this: a glucose number is data. It is information about what is happening in your body right now in response to a specific set of circumstances. It is not a report card. It is not a measure of your worth, your discipline, or your character. It is a number that tells you something useful, and then it is done. It does not mean anything beyond what it measures. A clinical study at the University of Toronto with 148 adults with type 2 diabetes found that participants who were trained specifically to respond to high glucose readings with curiosity, what might have caused this? What can I learn from this? Rather than self-criticism, showed significantly lower burnout scores, significantly better glucose variability, and higher rates of continued self-monitoring over 12 months compared to a control group. Curiosity versus judgment. Same number, completely different psychological outcome. And because the burnout was lower, the blood sugar control was actually better in the curiosity group. The next time the number is higher than you want it to be, try one question before any feeling. What happened today that might explain this? Not as a way to find something to blame. As a way to learn something useful, then move on. The third tool, the one thing at a time rule. One of the patterns that accelerates diabetes burnout is the tendency to attempt total simultaneous optimization of everything at once. Diet perfect, exercise consistent, medications timed exactly, sleep improved, stress managed, glucose tracked 4 times daily, all at the same time, starting Monday. This approach consistently fails, not because the goals are wrong, but because the cognitive and behavioral load of simultaneous change is incompatible with the already high baseline load of diabetes management. It is like adding 5 new heavy items to a backpack that is already at maximum weight. The backpack does not gradually overflow, it breaks. Research in behavior change consistently shows that single habit focus, choosing one specific behavior to improve, improving only that behavior for 4 to 6 weeks, then adding the next, produces better long-term outcomes than simultaneous multi-behavior change across a wide range of chronic conditions, including type 2 diabetes. The practical application is simple and requires a decision you may find uncomfortable. Deliberately choose to not work on certain things for now, not because they do not matter, they do, but because working on everything simultaneously is the strategy that leads to working on nothing because you have burned out completely. Pick one thing, make it specific and small, not eat better, something like, I will add 1 cup of cooked greens to my dinner every day this week. That is a complete goal. When that is stable, when it is no longer an effort, add the next thing. This is not giving up on the other goals. It is choosing the strategy that actually reaches them. The fourth tool, name the burnout to someone. This one is uncomfortable for many people, particularly those who have spent years managing their diabetes quietly and privately, not wanting to burden the people around them, not wanting to be seen as struggling, not wanting diabetes to become the defining topic of every conversation. But the research on chronic illness and psychological well-being is consistent on this point. Isolation is one of the most powerful amplifiers of burnout. And the act of naming what you are experiencing, saying out loud to another person, I am exhausted by this, has a measurable and significant effect on burnout severity. This does not require a therapist, Though therapy with someone who specializes in chronic illness is genuinely valuable and worth pursuing if it is accessible to you, it requires one person in your life who can hear what you are carrying without immediately trying to fix it. Not someone who will give you advice, someone who will simply understand. A landmark study on social support and chronic illness management followed 312 adults with type 2 diabetes over 3 years. Participants who had at least one person in their life they could talk to honestly about the emotional difficulty of their condition showed significantly lower burnout scores, significantly better medication adherence, and significantly better long-term glucose control than participants who reported managing their condition emotionally alone. One person, not a support group, not a therapist, though both can help, one person who knows what you are actually going through. The act of not being alone with it changes the weight of carrying it. The fifth tool, scheduled rest from self-monitoring. This one requires a conversation with your doctor before implementing because the appropriateness depends on your individual medical situation. But for many people with stable type 2 diabetes who are checking their glucose multiple times daily, there is clinical support for structured breaks from continuous monitoring as a burnout reduction strategy. A study published in the journal Diabetic Medicine found that people with type 2 diabetes on a structured reduced monitoring protocol, checking fasting glucose daily but reducing post-meal checking to 3 times per week rather than after every meal, showed no significant worsening of blood sugar control over 12 weeks while reporting significantly lower diabetes distress and burnout scores. The point is not to stop paying attention to your health. It is to recognize that hypervigilance, the constant monitoring, the continuous checking, the inability to eat a meal without immediately reaching for the meter, is itself a form of psychological harm that worsens the condition it is trying to control. If the meter has become a source of constant anxiety rather than useful information, that relationship needs to be addressed, not by ignoring your health, but by building a monitoring rhythm that gives you data without taking your peace. Talk to your doctor. Ask specifically, given my current stability, what is a monitoring frequency that keeps me informed without contributing to burnout? A doctor who understands chronic illness management will have a useful answer. If the response is only check more, consider seeking a second perspective from an endocrinologist or a certified diabetes educator. Now the full picture. Diabetes burnout is real, it is common, it is documented, and it directly worsens the condition it is a response to. It is not weakness. It is not failure. It is the predictable psychological consequence of managing an unrelenting condition in a world that rarely acknowledges the weight of doing so. The 5 tools: shrink the decision load through systematization, reframe glucose numbers as data rather than verdicts, apply the one thing at a time rule to behavior change, name the burnout to one person who can hold it with you, and discuss a sustainable monitoring rhythm with your doctor. None of these tools will normalize your glucose overnight. What they do is make the indefinite continuation of this work, the full-time job that never clocks out, genuinely more sustainable. And sustainable is the only strategy that actually works for the rest of your life. You are not failing at diabetes. You are exhausted by it. Those are completely different things, and you are not alone in that exhaustion. If this video said something that felt true to you, share it, not just with someone who has diabetes, with someone who loves a person with diabetes and needs to understand what that person is actually carrying. Subscribe to the channel. This is Dr. Adam Watanabe. Take care of yourself. I will see you next time. This video is strictly educational and does not replace medical guidance. If you are experiencing significant emotional distress, please speak with a healthcare professional or mental health provider.